Hello, home sellers. Today, for the first time ever, I'm going to tell you how I got myself suspended by the state of Ohio. Let's just say it was one of the biggest learning experiences of my life. But how does it relate to you? It had to do with these wholesalers and assignment investors coming along. And these are the folks that are buying ugly houses and making you cash offers on the spot. There are a lot of things we need to unpack about this, and it's happening more and more. So I want home sellers to understand exactly both sides of this issue so that they can make fine decisions and have plenty of actionable advice. As always, stick around. Lots to show you today. Hi, and welcome to Talking Realty, the go-to podcast for home sellers looking to make more money, save time, and avoid countless headaches. Whether you're selling a flip, a new build, an investment property, or the place you call home, you're in the right place. I'm your host, Glen Whitten, 20-year realtor and founder of the Ohio Property Group. Selling a home can be a complicated and costly process, often leaving home sellers feeling uncertain and overwhelmed. At the Ohio Property Group, we empower sellers with the tools and the help they need to successfully reach the closing table while keeping more money, a lot more money, in their pockets where it belongs. To learn more, head over to talkingrealty.com to pick up our monthly newsletter or any of our free home seller tools. And if you haven't already, please subscribe, rate, and review the show. Now, let's get to it. As I promised you in the opening, I'm going to relate a story that happened just a few years ago. Way back in 2019, we made the decision to go virtual and go fully statewide. So we started picking up a lot of new clients. One of the earliest people to jump on the old Ohio Property Group bandwagon were these wholesalers. I just had people signing up on my website wanting to list property in the MLS, which is what we do. So once we got a hold of these listings, the very first thing we always do is check to see who owns the property. We look for a public reference or some other database that we belong to that tells us who owns the property and therefore who has the right, the legal right, that is, to list the property. So as we're checking title on a couple of these listings, I see that the person who signed up on my website is not the person listed on the title. So we do a quick email to the person who signed up that says, hey, we have no doubt that you're connected to this property somehow, but we need you to connect the dots for us. In other words, what's the legal trail here? Because many times when somebody lists a property with me, they just bought it. Maybe they bought it and rehabbed it over the last month, but none of the public sites have caught up. So in that case, I just need something from closing showing that the property transferred from the person I see on the public sites to the person who signed up with me. Okay, so that happens a lot. The other thing we see is a property gets redeeded for whatever reason from an individual to a corporation, or an individual to a trust, or from one corporation to another corporation. So there's lots and lots of things that can happen. And as we know, public websites aren't always the most up to date. So that said, we understand these gaps occur. So I go through the process and I come to find out that the person who signed up on my website is an investor. They don't actually own the property, but they have what we old dogs would call an option to buy the property. So they signed a document that says, I have the legal right to purchase this property in the future for a certain price. Well, what these folks are trying to do is reassign that contract for presumably more money. So before we get into real examples, let me define a couple of roles here. First, we've got the seller. And who is the seller? The seller is going to be the person whose name is on the title. All right, we're going to call them the legal seller, or for short, the seller. The other ones we're going to call the investor. And the investor will be the wholesaler or the person who is putting this deal together. And then you've got me, the realtor. All right, so now you know who the players are. You've got the seller who owns the property, the investor who is trying to put a deal together, and you've got the realtor, me, who's trying to get it into the MLS and try to find an end buyer for this thing. So as we go through the process, the investor shows me a document signed by the seller stating that they have the right to purchase the property in the future. And I still remember this, it was paragraph 19. The seller has granted the investor the authorization to put the property into the multiple listing service. In other words, list it with a realtor. Okay, So I think we're golden. And I'm sure you can tell by the way I led off that I was not golden. I was anything but golden, but I didn't know that. And shame on me, because ignorance of the law is not a defense, as probably most of you know. Regardless, we go ahead and we put this property in the multiple listing service after the investor signs my listing agreement, and we start to market it. Well, within a week or two, I'm sitting on my little lounger at home. It's like 9:30 at night. I'm on the couch and I get a text message from someone whom I do not know. And the message says, "You listed my house without my permission." So immediately I go into full on panic mode because I don't know who this person is and I have no idea what's going on. I tried to call, the person did not answer, but they texted me again and just said, "I own," and then they inserted the address. I went and checked, and sure enough, that was the name that was on the title. This was the real seller, or at least they claimed to be. I said, "Well, I believe you granted permission to someone." And this person made it very obvious that they were not happy with the situation. So I immediately went into the MLS, like right there within 90 seconds of seeing that we had a train wreck on our hands. I went into the MLS and I canceled the listing. I then contacted the investor and said, "Hey, the seller, presumably," and I gave him the name and the phone number, and he verified, yes, that is the seller, "is unhappy." And he said, "Well, that happens." He called me, explained, "Well, sometimes we list property and we buy it for a certain amount. And in this case, he bought it for, we're just going to say 80,000. He had it under contract. The seller was going to get paid $80,000 at a future date. I think it was like 45 days in the future. And then he listed it with me for 120. Well, the seller saw that gap and freaked out and said, "Hey, I never gave you permission," and just kind of backtracked on the whole deal. So I canceled the listing. I told the seller and sent proof. I sent screenshots showing that it was now out of the MLS. And I apologized and said, "If you want to talk to me, you've got my number. I would love to iron this out with you." Then I told the investor, and he said, "You know what? Let me just talk to the seller and see if we can't work this out." Because unbeknownst to me, he was actually working with an end buyer, another buyer that was going to buy it for, it wasn't 120, but it was not 80. It was somewhere in between. So he gets it under contract and was about to tell me to update it in the MLS as under contract, but he hadn't done that yet because he didn't have all the documents back. So long story short, he ends up contacting the seller. The seller calms down. They end up moving forward and actually closing on this thing. So he ended up assigning that contract to another buyer. All right. So where does that leave me? At the time, I just was relieved to be done with it. Well, long about that same time, a different investor brought me a property that was similar to this. This, I would say within 60 days of this one that I just mentioned, I had another one. And in this case, the investor called me and told me, like a week or two in, that the seller was freaking out and that he was, quote unquote, a lunatic, was threatening her and it was awful. So she said, "You know what? Cancel it. Just cancel the deal. I'm sorry it didn't work out, but get it out of the MLS and let's move on." So I did. And honestly, didn't think much about either one of these cases for a while until one day, my esteemed colleague up in Findlay, who was monitoring the incoming mail, signed for a registered letter from the state of Ohio. Okay. I don't know where you do your business and I don't know what you do for a living, but as you can imagine, getting a registered letter, first of all, is never good news. And when it comes from the state of Ohio, is absolutely not good news. Not once, I don't think, has the state of Ohio ever sent out a registered letter to announce some really cool thing that's going to happen to you. All right, it's bad. And it was not only that, it was a big, thick envelope. It was huge. There was probably 150 pages in this thing. So I was down in Puerto Rico at our other house, and so he's scanning this thing and sending it to me one page at a time. And as I'm reading it, I'm becoming more and more mortified. It was the second seller that I mentioned, the quote unquote lunatic. I'm not saying this person was or wasn't. I never met them. But anyway, they went ahead and filed a complaint against me with the state of Ohio. See, here's the thing. Everybody else involved in the deal, the buyer, the investor, and the seller, and myself, I was the only one with a license. I was the only one that this seller had any recourse towards. So they went ahead and filed a complaint on it. And the state was simply notifying me. I mean, they hadn't ruled, of course, nothing had happened. And all they sent me was all the discovery that they received with the complaint, which was a lot of pages of letters and emails and text messages. There were tons of screenshots of text messages between the seller and the investor. So again, all of that happened outside of me because it was a limited service listing, but regardless. Okay, so that's pile number one. About 2 weeks later, I get another message. I'm assuming it's related to this one, but it's another registered letter from the state of Ohio, another big envelope. Nope. The first buyer that I mentioned also filed a complaint against me. Now, this is two different sellers, two different investors, two different cities. These weren't even within 100 miles of each other. But for whatever reason, both sellers took the same action, which was the guy with the license should pay. Now, I'm not going to claim that I was innocent in all this because clearly I wasn't. I was, if anything, sloppy. And so now I've got two piles. I've got seller number one with complaint number two, and I've got seller number two with complaint number one. And I have to figure this out. Well, as I'm reading about it, they're both very similar, and they're both about basically the same complaint, which is they complain to the state. Well, the state doesn't just come after you. I'm sure people do complain to the state about stuff that never turns into anything. Well, in this case, the state of Ohio took issue with a couple of things. Number one, that I listed a property in the MLS without the seller's consent. All right, and we'll talk about that in a second. And number two, that I allowed this investor, these two investors, to practice real estate without a license, that I somehow gave them this opportunity. Because in the state of Ohio, the technical definition is that anyone who, quote, for a fee, so you got to make money, helps anyone sell a property, then that requires a real estate license. Okay, I mean, it's a pretty basic definition, one that I was sadly unfamiliar with at the time. So to fast forward through all of this, this took almost a year to roll through the system. COVID hit, of course, in the middle of all this. So that delayed things by months and months because they couldn't have hearings. They just hadn't figured all this stuff out. For those of you who lived through it, remember, it was a crazy time. We didn't know what was going on, but it didn't go away. So I'm out one night with my wife and some friends, and the phone rings. It's like 5:30, 6 o'clock on a Friday. And it is someone I don't know. I answer the phone, and lo and behold, it is the attorney for the division of real estate down in Columbus. It's the attorney representing the state, basically, and she wants to talk about this. So she actually called me about complaint number one, which was seller number two. And we're having this discussion, and I'm trying to explain to her, hey, I had this document where the seller signed a piece of paper stating that the investor could list the property with me. Well, what I came to learn was that that's not good enough, that it is not permissible for a seller to assign those rights. They can sell the house, they can do all sorts of things, but a seller cannot allow a third party to list their property, to sign a listing agreement. I did not know this, clearly, and all my apologies aside, I was still guilty. So on that call, I told her, hey, by the way, whatever we do for this one, we're going to have to do for the other one. And she said, what other one? So I told her, I had the file number because I had scans of everything with me. I said, hey, look up this file number. And sure enough, she was like, oh, yeah. And I said, these are almost identical. So can we roll them together and talk about figuring this out? I have to say, for years, I had cold sweat nightmares about what it would be like to deal with the state. And it's not a walk in the park, but I can tell you, these are human beings operating out there. And they have a job to do. And their job is to protect the public, to protect sellers and buyers, and really anybody in the public from any unscrupulous behavior going on in the business world. Well, that's why licenses are a privilege. They're not a guarantee. Just because I pass the test, just because I pay the fee, doesn't mean I get to keep my license, right? It's just like your driver's license. It is a privilege, not a right. And a privilege can be revoked, just like a license. So as I'm talking through things with this seriously wonderful person, and I'm not making that up, that's not sarcasm. this wonderful attorney for the state of Ohio, I come to realize that there was a whole lot going on that I didn't understand. And frankly, she didn't have to take the time to explain all this to me. She could have just slapped me with probably some very, very serious things. I could have ultimately been shut down. I could have lost my license for good and been forced to go do something else. I'll never forget in the middle of all this, because this dragged on for several months. From the time she called me until it was finally settled was several months, because there's a lot of back and forth, and every proposal, every piece of it has to go through the superintendent. And that takes time because the superintendent is just not sitting around all day wondering what Glen Whitten is up to. Presumably she has other things on her plate. All right. So each step of the way. So it took a long time. Throughout this process, I'm talking to my team, Justin and Tasia, as you know, my kids, about possible outcomes. And one of them is that I could maybe no longer have a license. And so in the middle of all this, as I'm fretting about what's going to happen to my little business here, my son, Justin, who is constantly sage advice from Justin. Plus he's an aspiring Buddhist, I think. I don't know if he would identify that way, but just based on the way he talks, he said, if they take your license, you just have to cross real estate off of the list of things you can do. I just thought, well, that is a fantastic way to look at it. But anyway, it terrified me. So as we get to the end of it, the state finally says, look, we get that you were not out to do malicious things. And in one case, the house actually closed. It went through, the seller signed all the documents and ended up closing. Doesn't change the fact that I allowed a third party to sign a listing agreement. And after this was all explained to me in very clear terms, and not just a deal with it terms, but she really took the time, this attorney, to explain to me the ins and outs and the legal workings of why it is illegal and why the state takes such a dim view of this type of behavior. So I walked away a better person. And I will tell you what, I will tell you at the end of this episode what happened to me and what happened to my license and how it all shook out. So here's what I learned that you need to know. First of all, what is wholesaling? Wholesaling in real estate involves an investor securing a contract on a property, often at a very discounted price. And then their goal is, before they have to buy that property, to sell it to someone else, to assign that contract. So I buy it for 80. On paper, I tell you, the home seller, I'll buy your property in 45 days for $80,000. And then I have 45 days to sell that contract to someone else at a profit. That's my goal. And of course, I would love to use the MLS, but as we now know, that is highly problematic. So the assignment clause in these purchase agreements to the seller from the investor essentially says that, hey, by the way, while I'm getting ready to buy your home in 45 days, I'm going to try to sell it to someone else. And you sign off, you, the seller, sign off on this now that says, if I do find a ready, willing, and able buyer, and I'm in the mood, I will transfer or assign this contract to that next buyer. So you may end up not selling it to me. In fact, odds are you won't end up selling it to me. You will end up selling it to someone I find. And so that is their job. Their job is to find a seller who will sell and then find a buyer who would buy for more than what the seller agreed to sell it for. And then they keep the difference. They keep that assignment fee, or profit is what the rest of the world calls it. So hopefully you understand that the first investor is not the final buyer. They're not the end buyer. So what led to the complaints? The complaints were both rooted in the same feeling, which was that the seller had been duped. The seller felt like they had been misled, because one minute they've got an investor, probably, well, clearly very convincingly telling them that their property is only worth $80,000. And again, I'm making these numbers up, so please understand that for illustration purposes only. They've got an investor telling them that their property is only worth $80,000, but then, 48 hours later, if they happen to get it listed in the MLS, they see it all over the web for $120,000. Now they're like, wait a minute, what is going on here? How can they tell me that my house is only worth $80,000, but then there it is, photos and all, for sale? And then who's this realtor that I've never met that's selling my house? I can totally understand why the sellers were upset. The reason I share this story is because I want you to understand I could have just walked away from this side of the business, closed that door forever, and just said, I have no interest. It's poison to me. I don't want to do this anymore. But this podcast, 99% of what I write is to help home sellers reach their goals and help them reach them with, as we say, more money in their pockets, fewer headaches, and saving time. So by explaining this to you via my horrible experience, hopefully you walk away from it stronger and a better seller, more prepared when you run into this stuff in the wild. So you've got the situation, you've got a home seller who wants out, you've got an investor who wants to make money, and eventually you've got an end buyer who would like to buy the property. And then you may or may not have a realtor like me or someone else involved in the process. This episode of the Talking Realty podcast is brought to you by our friends over at Associates Title. This team is shaking things up by focusing on what truly matters, putting the customer first. Believe me, that is not necessarily the norm in the title company world. Whether you're buying, selling, or investing for sale by owner or working with a realtor, they've got your back with incredible cost savings and the latest technology to streamline the process. Their secure online portal keeps everyone in the loop, from buyers and sellers to lenders and agents, all while keeping your data safe and communications crystal clear. If you're getting ready to make a move, don't underestimate the importance of having a great title company in your corner. Check them out today at associatestitleinc.com or call my friend Ryan Phillips at 614-419-2418. That's 614-419-2418. Check the show notes for that information and links to their website. Do not leave your title company choice to chance. Now, back to the podcast. So let's start at the beginning. How do these investors find sellers who are willing to play this game? Many times they use direct mail. They'll buy lists of distressed properties or maybe get a list of homeowners that are motivated to sell. So they get a list of absentee owners, for example. The house is vacant, but the owner clearly doesn't live there because the house is vacant. Maybe homes that are in pre-foreclosure. These lists are available. Just trust me on that. They are available everywhere. Probate cases, tax liens, anything like that, where the investor spots a seller who may be in trouble or motivated to move forward with a quick deal. So then they start sending out postcards, they start sending out letters. And if you want to know who owns a property, as you probably know, you can jump on the county auditor's website and see not only the property address, but you can see who the owner is and where they live. You can get their address if it's different. Another one, if the investor is local, which typically they are not, almost every investor I've run across who does wholesaling, who does these assignments contracts, they don't live in the state where they're operating. They're almost always working on a national basis because the rules of the game are basically the same no matter where you are. And if they never have to see the property, they can operate from anywhere. But if they live locally, they might do some driving for dollars, where they'll cruise up and down the streets of their target market, look for homes that are unkempt, lawn growing over. They've got shutters falling off the side of the house, or just something that says the house is in disrepair or it is in more than likely pre-foreclosure. It's vacant, it's not being taken care of. This is an opportunity to the investor. They'll hop on the auditor's website, see who owns it, see where they live, and they'll start to market to them. They're going to attempt to reach them directly. They also use a lot of online marketing, Facebook ads or Instagram ads, or we'll just call them social media ads, Google targeting ads, with the phrases, you've seen these before: cash for your home, fast cash offers, sell your house fast, we buy ugly houses. You've seen a lot of these. They're hoping whoever clicks on those ads is looking for a fast sale for cash, because that is the opening of their funnel. You could try cold calling, so they can buy lists of property owners who are in trouble and get their phone number, get their email, and they'll start marketing directly to them. They might start networking. They'll attach themselves to realtors who specialize in this type of property. They'll attach themselves to probate lawyers or foreclosure departments of banks or asset managers who handle foreclosure properties. They will get themselves aligned with them so that they get leads on these properties as they're starting. Because in Ohio, like a lot of other states, foreclosure is a kind of a lengthy process from the time you miss your first payment until it's actually for sale on the sheriff's auction. It could be years. So they will build these relationships and maybe offer some sort of kickback or some quid pro quo for whoever it is that's sending them leads. All right. They'll use we used to call these bootleg signs, but they're also called bandit signs, where they'll just run around in the middle of the night. Literally, this is how it works. They'll load up 500, 1,000 of these signs in a neighborhood that's got a bunch of these properties, or they see a cluster of foreclosures happening. So they'll go out with these, they look like political signs, right? They're the cardboardy fold over type signs, or the corrugated plastic signs with the wire stands. And they'll make up a bunch of these, hundreds of them. And then they'll go out in the middle of the night and they'll just start stabbing them in the ground all over that neighborhood. And yes, they'll get complaints and most of them are going to end up in the garbage. But imagine you go to bed on Friday and there are no signs, and then you wake up on Saturday and there's hundreds of these signs all over your neighborhood. You're going to notice, right? This is an old school bootleg campaign, or bandit signs as they're called. And it's just going to have a phrase like cash for your home, and then either a web address, an email address, a phone number, something on it for you to do something with it. And guess what? They work. Cost them a few hours of time, a few $100s in materials. And even if they get one deal off of every third or fourth campaign, it's paid for itself. So that's another thing you'll see. The other thing they do, and this is good old fashioned detective work, is they monitor the online auction sites. They look for people who are trying to sell. They might monitor for sale by owner sites. They might monitor Craigslist or whatever the similar version of that is in 2024. I assume Craigslist is still around. I don't know. But anyway, they're going to be looking for people trying to sell their property, and they're going to be looking for properties that look like they need some work, because that is key. They have to have a seller that is motivated, that wants out, that sees nothing but hurdles between here and closing. So they're hoping they can slide in there and take advantage of that situation. And you got to understand, in the last so many years, there has been a huge proliferation of these investors. They take courses. They're, go back to the old get rich quick. As long as human beings are operating and money is a thing, get rich quick will always be around. And it's taken many forms over the years, but one of the current versions is, I will show you, pay my fee, hire me as a coach, take my course, come to my seminar, whatever it is. I will teach you how to make millions of dollars flipping real estate without ever buying a single property. And that's their pitch to the investors. So the investor goes, they learn all about this, and it's kind of a multi-level thing, because then a coach gets a bunch of students, and then the students go out and get more students, and everybody on the downline gets money off of all these deals. So it's nothing new. It's nothing new. It's just a new twist on a very old, tried and true idea. So what's the pitch? So they get a seller who's in this situation or who is motivated. What is the pitch? And frankly, why does it work? Because from the outside, most of us might be looking at this going, who in the world would sell their house at a steep discount? Like, this doesn't make any sense. Why wouldn't you put it on the open market, get maximum dollars for it? So fast cash offer, that plays right into a worried seller's hands. It's right into their wheelhouse, because what they want is to move this property. Maybe they inherited it. Maybe they had it when they were working and had money, but now they're not working, or they don't have money, and the house is starting to show some wear. Maybe it needs a roof, it needs a furnace, it needs something that's expensive, that if you're going to keep living there, you're going to have to sink money you don't have into this property. Now we've got them sort of in this position where they're going to be open to this. So sellers who are in urgent financial situations, like avoiding foreclosure, managing a distressed property, like we talked about, maybe they just need cash for some reason, for not having anything to do with the house. Either way, that cash now is kind of the gist of that argument. The other biggie is selling as is. I'm part of the problem with this, because I preach prep. I'm talking about sellers who are not in a hurry, sellers who have a little bit of time or money to sink into this property before they put it on the market. Yes, that's ideal. You're going to get very top market value for it. But if you don't have the time, you don't have the resources to fix the property, you can still sell it. You can still put it on the open market through the MLS and sell it as is. We do a bunch of these. I just did a podcast episode about one that had an active roof leak. I had a tree branch sticking through the roof, and we sold it for, I don't know, $250,000, $300,000. I mean, it was a gorgeous house, a gorgeous neighborhood. So the things lined up, but there may be people who think that if I'm going to sell an as is property, it has to be a pile of junk. It has to be this $40,000, $50,000 blower upper. No, not true. You can have a high end as is. So just kind of keep that in mind. But these wholesalers, or these investors rather, will come in and talk not just about cash, but about, hey, don't touch a thing. Leave everything where it is. Take whatever you want or don't. We don't care. We don't care what it looks like. We don't care what's wrong with it. We'll buy it as is and we will sell it as is. Okay. So that's another big hook. And it works because, people don't want to mess with this stuff. They don't want the delays. They don't want to renegotiate during nightmare inspections. They just see it as, and maybe they're embarrassed. Maybe they're not pleased with the way the house is. And maybe they feel that reflects on them somehow. Okay, whatever. But cash and as is, two big hooks that make this work. Another biggie, no realtor fees or commissions. Of course, this is attractive. We know this. My whole business is centered around the idea that we can deliver high quality realtor services without the giant commission. So I get this one. So sellers, of course, see this as a way to save money. They understand I can sell my house as is. I might be able to sell it for cash, but man, I'm still going to have to deal with the realtor commissions. Okay. So this gets at the heart of that fear. Avoid showings, avoid open houses. Now, first of all, there's no rule that says you have to show your property. There's no rule that says you have to have an open house, but sellers often assume that if I put my house in the market with a realtor, oh my gosh, I'm going to have this parade of showings. I really don't want to get my house ready. I really don't want to deal with all that. Well, guess what? You don't have to. Sellers can be very, very anxious when it comes to the showing process, or maybe they have logistics getting out of the house or leaving the house for showings, or who knows, and they can't really move because they don't have the cash to move. So they're hoping they'll get the cash and then get some time afterward to use that cash to find a better place to live or a different place to live. This is a huge selling point. The other is the guaranteed close. Now, pay very close attention, because many of these investors who are doing wholesaling, who are doing equitable interest, who are doing assignments, have absolutely no intention to close. Their only goal is to get you to agree to a price and to buy them 45 days or 60 days to sell it to someone else or assign that contract to someone else. Many of these investors don't even have the cash to buy your house. It works because people think cash as is, no showings, no realtor, and I'm going to get my money guaranteed in 45 days. What could possibly go wrong? So that's the pitch. It's very effective. It hits their emotional side. It hits their fears. Humans make decisions on an emotional level. Truth number 19, right here on my list of truths, right here on my wall. People buy on emotion and justify with logic. This is no different. All right. Maybe they're suffering from FOMO. Maybe they're suffering from anxiety, or maybe they're suffering from greed. I don't know. But the simplicity of the pitch, the cash, the as is, the no showing, all that stuff, that makes it very, very appealing on an emotional level. It creates a sense of urgency, because a lot of times these investors are pitching, hey, I've got 5 other people I'm going to talk to, and I've only got so much time and so much money and so many opportunity. You want it or not? So they put you on a very short leash to make a decision. You should be aware that whenever someone is pitching A, something that is way too good to be true, and B, that you have to decide on right now, run. Just run. All right. My business will put your home in the MLS for a few $100s. It often gets categorized in the, oh, this is too good to be true. It can't possibly be what it is. It is. But you know what I don't do is tell you, if you don't do it right now, I'm not going to be here tomorrow. I tell people all the time, well, I'm not quite ready to sell. I don't know what I want to do. And I just say the same thing to all of them. You know what? We're not going anywhere. When you're ready, we'll be here. Take your time. Do your investigation. Feel good about this. All right. If you're not getting that from the investor, it's a red flag. One of the other appealing parts is the simplicity of it all, right? It's cash, it's fast. It just looks easy. It looks super, super appealing. And they tend to target people with vulnerabilities, whether it's financial or emotional, but they've got situational, emotional, financial, all of it, vulnerabilities. And then this offer seemingly from the sky drops in to their lap, and the seller is just, it's hard for them to say no at that point. So you found a pool of sellers, you found some people who listened to your pitch, and now they're ready to move forward. So how does it work? Normally they present you with a document, and it's typically not in person. There are some that are done in the kitchen, so to speak, where they sit down with a pen and paper and they go over them. Those are very persuasive, but a lot of these investors are completely out of town. But many of them will send you an email that just says, hey, follow this link, click here to sign, and we're off to the races. They want you to first sign the assignment contract with them. Next, a lot of these investors have gotten pretty savvy. They'll send a power of attorney that grants the investor the legal capacity to sign listing agreements, sign purchase agreements. I would say be very, very careful. Most people who are signing documents, when they see the words power of attorney, understand this is a big deal. So we're now seeing a new wrinkle. They've changed it from power of attorney, and I know there is a legal difference between the two, but I'm not going to get into it, to something called an attorney in fact. Well, that is, for our purposes today, essentially the same thing as a power of attorney. It is a seller signing away legal rights to do certain things. And that is a very, very serious situation that sellers should be careful about. I would highly recommend you take that to an attorney first. Get an attorney that you've worked with before, that you trust, that is disinterested in this entire process. Ask them to review it. It will probably cost you a little bit of money, but better spending a little money on this than finding out later you signed away your life. But the bottom line is, if you don't understand what you're signing, don't sign it. That includes my paperwork. If you list with me and you see something in my paperwork that is not clear, that doesn't track, stop the process, get clean on it, or walk away. So once they get over the paperwork hurdle, then there is some cash up front. In the old days, a lot of these assignments were pulled off by waving some cash in front of the seller, saying, okay, I'm going to give you all the cash in 45 days, but right now I'm going to give you $500, $1,000, whatever. And you can do whatever you want with it. Well, that seller may be in such a state that that $500 or $1,000 could be very, very tempting, because they may have very urgent needs, including one to move. And that might be enough for them to, put a deposit down on another place and get moved. But we're seeing more and more of them come in with no down payment. They're not offering any money up front. They're only offering the cash at the closing. Between the power of attorney, the attorney in fact, the paperwork, and the cash up front, it is a pretty clean and effective process. The other biggie is the promise to close. So a lot of these investors will put a short date, 30 days, 40, usually it's 45 or 60 days. But what I can tell you is that in many cases, if they can't flip that contract, if they can't get an end buyer to take over for more than what they promised the seller, they're going to either cancel or extend, or they're going to renegotiate the contract. So many times it's not going to go down the way it is in that paper. I'm not saying that it never happens. It is just rare that in 45 days you get a bag of money that matches what was in that contract that you signed. More than likely, they're going to offer you 80. So now everything over 80,000 is gravy for them. They're going to try to sell it for, say, 120. Well, if they're not getting any action at 120, they're going to try to sell it for 110, for 105, for 100, for 90, 95, whatever. And they're going to keep chunking it down. As they get closer and closer to the end of that contract, they're going to get more and more aggressive to try to assign it to someone else. If they can't, they're going to extend this or try to. They're going to come back to you and say, hey, look, we need a little bit more time, insert reason why, doesn't matter. And then they're going to ask you to do one or two things. One might be definitely to extend the contract. So I know we said 30 days. I know we said 45. I know we said 60, but I need a little more time for whatever reason. So, okay, great. Sign another piece of paper and voila, you've now extended it to 60, 90 days out. Okay. The other thing they may or may not do is renegotiate that price. Hey, I can't get you 80. I might be able to get you, market conditions have changed. I might go down to 75. I might go to 70, whatever. And you're sitting here going, man, I really kind of got that. I've been thinking about that cash for these weeks, and now it's about to slip away. So I guess 75 is better than nothing, or 70 is better than nothing. They're going to try to work you down because that helps them get their profit that they need. Okay. And these are investors. They're not in it to help you. They're in it to make money. End of story. My fellow home sellers, as you've heard me mention before, we do not run paid ads for this podcast or for the Ohio Property Group. We depend entirely on word of mouth. grassroots campaigns. And I'm going to ask a special favor today. We've gotten several ratings recently, so thank you to those of you who have done this, but we haven't gotten our first review, and I am really looking forward to that. So I'm asking you as a personal favor, please take a few seconds. If you haven't rated the show yet, please do that, because that's how this show gets spread to other listeners. So anything you can do to help, whether it's a rating, whether it's a review, or even sharing it with someone you know privately or on the socials, every little bit helps. Our job here is to spread this information to as many home sellers as possible, and I can't do that without you. So please take a few seconds and lend us a hand, will you? All right, back to the podcast. And in some rare cases, they might put it in the MLS. They might actually find a buyer, and maybe that deal comes unglued. So lots and lots of stuff can go wrong, but that is typically how it goes down, from initial marketing to the pitch, to the paperwork, to the payment. But in almost no cases is it going to close until they find an end buyer who's not them. They're going to find somebody to pay them more than what they're contracted for, and they're going to sell it to them. And it could either happen with one closing where they just assign it to the end buyer and then they keep a fee, or they could do what's called a double closing, where they close with you at 10 a.m. and at 10:15 a.m. they turn around and close with the end buyer. So it's called a double closing, and some title companies will help this work. So they close with you at 80, and then at 10:15 they close with the next buyer for 100 and whatever. Okay, so that's kind of how that goes. So the real risks here are the lack of transparency, the sort of cloudiness of all of this is, and I think anybody who's this far into the episode, you know that there should be red flags just going off everywhere. And then also the biggie for me is that you've got an audience of one. You've got a buyer pool of one. Well, what happens if you go to an auction and there's only one buyer? You don't get market value, almost never. It's just not going to happen. So the same is true here. If you're selling your house to someone who approached you, I could almost guarantee you, not every time, but most of the time, if you were to put that property in the MLS for a week, I'll bet you'd get more than whatever that person who approached you is offering. It's possible. It has happened where a private sale has gone down above market value. It does happen. It is the exception. Truth number 6, more buyers equals more money for the seller. When you expose your property to a much larger market, i.e. the multiple listing service, I mean, heck, even putting a sign in the yard is exposing it to more than one buyer. Now everybody who drives by knows that it's for sale, and word of mouth, you might find a second buyer who's willing to pay you a little more. Food for thought. But putting in the MLS, you can't get much better exposure than putting it in the MLS, because that's now going to spider out to hundreds of websites. Literally thousands and thousands and thousands of interested buyers can now see this property no matter where they live. The other big risk is the deal cancellation. So if they can't get it sold and they can't get you to come down, or they do get you to come down, eventually this deal is just going to run out of steam and they're not going to close. They're most of the time, they're not going to pony up the cash, because now they know it's not a good investment and they don't want to own your house. They want to make money, especially if they're out of state. They're not going to want to buy your house because they have no way to keep track of it. Many times they don't have the money, and they certainly have no motivation to buy your house. So they're going to find a way to get out, or they're just going to walk away and you're not going to hear from them anymore. So one of the problems the state has, at least based on their experience, and theirs is certainly broader than mine, is that some of these investors, or many of these investors, they have very little capital, but they're out here signing contract after contract after contract across many states to buy properties for which they may have the cash to buy none of them. And yet all these sellers out there are expecting a check in X number of weeks. This is part of the program. Get them under contract, try to sell them. If you can't, make the deal better, extend the deal, or get out. So the state has a problem with that. They feel like this is deceptive, and it is. So the state is kind of cracking down on these things, but that's another topic for another day. But for now, you need to see some sort of proof of cash. And I'm going to tell you, even that's going to be weak, because you or I could go out tomorrow and, probably make up a pretty convincing looking letter that says I have the cash. I could maybe even show you an old bank statement. But I've seen this trick with many investors. They'll show you a bank statement that's 45 days old, and they've shown that bank statement to 20 different sellers. Well, they're not going to buy all 20 of those properties. They only have the cash for one or two. So keep that in mind. The other thing I would ask them to do is demonstrate in the last 60 or 90 days how many properties they have actually purchased. This is verifiable. If they tell you they bought 123 Main Street in Phoenix, Arizona, you should be able to go onto the web and find real proof that this same company, same LLC, same company bought that property. My guess is they're going to tell you that they change LLCs all the time, or they set up a unique one for each deal. Either way, all of this stuff is verifiable, but if they can't give you the information that you're asking for, which is, hey, give me proof that you bought, how many properties have you bought in the last, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days? And then can I see proof that you bought all of these properties? Because odds are they're not going to be able to show it to you. So this whole episode is centered around the fact that these sellers are out there. They're in trouble. They might have a foreclosure looming. They might have an urgent financial need where they need to get rid of this house. And I'm going to tell you the shortest path for you to actually get the money and actually walk away is to put it in the MLS, list it as is. And if you can't accommodate showings, don't have showings. And there's two ways you can do that. Number one, you can have what's called curbside offers only, where you only allow offers to come in sight unseen. These buyers can drive by, they can look at the outside, they can look at all your photos, and I would highly suggest getting photos, even if the house is ugly, even if the inside is cluttered, doesn't matter. Get pictures so they can get an idea of the interior of the house, no matter how bad it is. You've seen these pictures online, right? There are pictures where parts of the floor are missing, where windows are shattered and just boarded up. That is smart because the house is what it is. And if you're going to ask investors to buy the house without walking through it first, you need to show them recent photos of what it looks like. So take your photos, put them up, and then tell the world curbside offers only, or you can do what's called a walkthrough upon acceptance. So in other words, once we negotiate the deal, then you have the walkthrough within, a day or two. And we do those, we do a lot of those, especially when there's a renter involved. We'll do those. But there is a way. You can put it on the MLS. You can sell it as is. Tell people you can do whatever you want to it after you buy it. But I'm not going to be responsible for it, nor am I interested in negotiating for all the stuff that's wrong with it. Now, it is going to affect your price that you're going to get because now you're asking the buyer to take the risk. But I promise you, it's still better than what you're going to get one of these other deals. You're going to get a higher price. You're going to make more money putting it on the open market, selling it as is with curbside offers, with interior photos, than you will putting it with one of these wholesalers, because the wholesaler is probably not going to buy it. And if they do, it's because they sold it for a lot more. So if they can't get a lot more, then guess what? They're not going to buy it. So you are no worse off cutting out the middleman and going straight to the market with your property. Do what they're doing, only do it legally, because you, the seller, can sign the listing agreement. You can sign the property disclosures. You can do all of these things. And we know how to do this for you. If you get approached and it looks attractive, take that same deal, go to your local realtors, call me up if you're in Ohio, and let's talk about it. At least shop around. See if you can get a better offer from putting it in the MLS, because I'll almost bet you can. Because when you open this up to more buyers, you're going to get more interest. And even a second buyer is enough for us to get the ball rolling and get biddings going so that we can maximize your market value. I did a whole section here I prepared for you on the pros and cons of dealing with a wholesale company. And I got to be honest, I'm not sure I can sell this. So if you need quick access to cash, there are a few wholesalers out there who will actually follow through. I will tell you, they're in the vast minority. If you need to sell the house without showing it and with no prep, you can do that with an MLS listing just as easily as you can do it with a wholesaler or an assignment. The downside, though, is you're not going to get maximum market value out of it compared to what you could get putting it in the MLS. The risk of cancellation is real if they can't sell that contract. And if they can sell that contract, that means your house was worth quite a bit more than what you sold it for. So you're giving up that. But if you list with an MLS listing company, such as myself or any other flat fee or even a full service realtor, you're going to get the full market exposure, which means you're going to increase the chances of finding a buyer who will pay you top dollar, or at least the top of your market value range, even as is, even without showings. It's out there and it happens. We do this. And we've had situations exactly like this where we can sell that house. The flexibility to sell as is or to offer alternative viewing arrangements, we can talk through all of that stuff. More straightforward transactions with fewer legal complications. Anytime you're being asked to sign stuff you don't understand, anytime you're in situations where you're being rushed, that should be a red flag. Stop, slow down, get some other opinions, and see if you can't come up with a better solution. The downside, of course, is that the MLS will take a little bit longer. But in reality, I don't know that those investors were ever going to buy the property to begin with. So is it really taking longer? One of the biggest downsides to listing with someone like me is the upfront flat fee. Now, there are lots of realtors who will take your listing and get paid at closing. But if that upfront fee is the only thing standing between you and making this happen with us, get on my call schedule. It's in the show notes, because there are ways, or reach out to me. There are ways, alternative ways we can make this happen for you if that's the only thing standing in your way. Even if you're in a huge hurry, whether you are or you aren't, if you're considering taking one of these deals, one of these we buy cash houses deals, I urge you to hop over to talkingrealty.com, take a look at my website, reach out to me. And if you're in another state, I will help you find someone that can help you, because I can't help you outside of Ohio, but I can certainly help you get connected with someone who's reputable, who will do a good job for you. And that's me putting my money where my mouth is. There is no need to take shortcuts to get where you're going, even if you're in a hurry. At the end of the day, what you want is the most amount of money in the least amount of time with the least amount of headaches. And that is our number one set of goals here for you. Transparency and knowledge are your best tool. This is why we do this, is to equip you so that you're ready when you go out there and all of these folks who are either well-intentioned or not start coming at you. I want you to have some resources to be ready to deal with them as they come up. Beware of quick cash offers. Beware of something that's way too good to be true. And especially beware of them if they're pushing you to make a decision right now. So to wrap up my little story, I ended up negotiating what I felt was a pretty good deal with the state. The maximum penalties for the two complaints were severe. Years of suspension, tens of thousands of dollars in fines, and the possibility that I might never get to practice real estate again, which would have broken my heart. Here's what I ended up negotiating with them. And this was only by the sheer grace of the people I was dealing with. They gave me a 15-day suspension, which I served in November of 2021. They gave me a $1,500 fine, which I paid the day of the suspension. I was very pleased that and this was for both violations, both complaints. They rolled them into one. And then 30 hours of continuing education, where I learned a lot about the law that I should have already known. So that was how the division treated me. And I got to say, my relationship with the division, first of all, my fear of dealing with them is gone. I now know that these are real people who are truly just trying to do their job and look out for the public and help realtors do a good job. So we have a good relationship with the folks there. And we do reach out to them from time to time to ask for clarifying questions, ask them to answer questions that our sellers are asking, help them troubleshoot situations we've never seen before. And they're great. They're a great resource. They do their job. So that was the biggest part. Besides what I learned was that I've now built a bridge to the people, and we have the same goal, which is protecting the public and providing them with the very best possible solutions for dealing with their own real estate. And with that, I will let you get back to your day. Thank you for sticking around today. Hopefully you learned a little something, maybe had a little fun. If so, please share this episode with someone on the socials or privately. Feel free to tag me if you do. The Talking Realty podcast is brought to you by Associates Title and the Ohio Property Group, a family-owned brokerage serving all 88 Ohio counties with realtor services. By the way, all of these episodes are available on video, on YouTube or our website, or through all major podcast platforms. So however you like to consume your podcasts, we will find a way to help you. But if you'd like to see any topics or questions or guests on future episodes, please head over to talkingrealty.com and say hello. I would love to hear from you. Thanks again for tuning in. Until next time, keep making smart moves in your real estate journey. For the Ohio Property Group, this is Glen Whitten signing off. And remember, you can sell it. We can help.